Everyone in town thought she'd lost her mind when she spent her savings on a condemned aircraft hangar, a rusting shell of steel and silence. But when Marley Reyes stepped across the cracked concrete floor and felt the hollow echo beneath her boots, she realized something was hidden below. What she uncovered wasn't just history buried in the dark. It was a secret so well engineered, it could rewrite everything she thought she knew about her father's past. Before we dive into this unbelievable discovery, tell us where you're watching from. And if you love stories about forgotten places, buried secrets, and the people brave enough to uncover them, make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's episode reveals what was waiting at the end of that hidden runway. The hangar sat at the edge of town like a relic from another era, a ribcage of steel and glass rising from a sea of weeds. The auction listing had been brief, almost dismissive. Condemned property, former military site, structural damage sold as is. Most bidders never even looked up from their phones. But Marley Reyes had. Something about the way the light cut across the corrugated roof, the way the shadows seemed to move within it, made her pulse quicken. She'd been chasing forgotten things her entire life. Broken engines, junked trucks, and memories that refused to die quietly. So when the auctioneer's gavel came down at $500, she raised her hand without hesitation. By the time she drove her pickup to the site the next morning, word had already spread. Small towns were fast that way. "You bought that?" One of the mechanics at her garage had asked, incredulous. "Marley, that place is condemned. The floor's half gone. It's not even safe to walk in." She'd just smiled and shrugged, same as she always did when people mistook her curiosity for recklessness. The truth was, she didn't care what it looked like, she cared what it felt like. And standing there now, boots crunching over cracked pavement, she could feel it humming. The air inside was thick with dust and quiet. The kind of silence that makes you whisper without meaning to. Marley's flashlight beam drifted across rusted catwalks, forgotten scaffolding, and the skeletal remains of aircraft parts that looked too old to matter. But there was something beneath it all, a faint echo that followed her every step. When she stomped her heel against the floor, it didn't sound right. It wasn't solid. There was space underneath. She crouched, pressed her gloved palm to the ground, and listened. A low, hollow vibration rolled up through the concrete, faint but unmistakable. She straightened slowly, heart thudding in her chest. "What are you hiding?" she murmured. The words slipped out like breath. She crossed the hangar again, pacing the distance, tapping the ground with a rusted pipe. The echo changed near the center, deeper, wider, alive. Her eyes followed the path of light filtering through broken skylights, aligning perfectly with the hollow sound below. It felt intentional, engineered. On the far wall, she found a rusted control panel covered in peeling paint and warning labels she couldn't quite read. The main switch was missing, wires frayed and blackened by time. She brushed away the dust, revealing faded letters embossed into the metal. Meridian Aerospace Property of the U.S. Department of Defense. Marley froze. Meridian. The name clawed at something buried in memory. Her father had worked for a company with that name back before his last flight. Before the accident they never talked about again. Outside, the wind picked up, whispering through shattered windows. Marley turned toward the wide-open hangar doors, where her truck sat in the afternoon Sunday. She could almost hear the laughter of the townsfolk echoing through her mind. A condemned hangar? She's lost it this time. Maybe she had. But as the echo rolled beneath her boots one more time, deep and metallic, like a secret heartbeat, Marley knew she hadn't bought junk. She'd bought a story someone had buried, and she was going to find out why. By the second day, Marley had already dragged half a dozen trash bins across the hangar floor. The place was a graveyard of twisted metal and forgotten tools, each piece thick with grime and history. She worked in silence except for the scrape of her broom and the distant echo of her own footsteps. Every sound seemed to carry longer than it should, bouncing off steel beams before fading into that strange hollow beneath the concrete. It wasn't imagination. Something down there was amplifying the noise, as if the floor itself were a lid. She paused near the center of the hangar, where the echo had sounded deepest the day before. Her flashlight beams skimmed over the cracked concrete, catching on a faint line, a seam, almost invisible under layers of dust. She knelt and ran her fingers along it. It wasn't natural. The edges were straight, deliberate. Her pulse kicked up. A hatch, maybe? Or something that had been sealed long ago. That evening, Marley drove to the county records office, still wearing her coveralls and work gloves. The clerk, a man in his 60s with nicotine-stained fingers, looked up as she placed the property file on the counter. "Another one of those hangar dreamers," he muttered, flipping through pages. "You know how many people tried to turn that place into something before it got condemned? Probably none who found this," Marley said, laying down a photograph she'd taken of the floor seam. His brows lifted. "That wasn't on any of the original blueprints," he said, scanning his screen. "Last structural drawing we have is from 1971, back when Meridian Aerospace leased the site." He tapped the monitor, frowning. "After that, everything goes dark. The company shut down fast government order, sealed records, no demolition permits, no transfer logs. It's like they vanished overnight." Marley leaned in. "Why would the government bury a hangar project?" The clerk gave her a dry smile. "Miss Reyes, people have been asking that question for 50 years. Back at the hangar, night had fallen. Her truck's headlights cut through the darkness, throwing long shadows across the cracked runway. She couldn't stop thinking about the name Meridian. It wasn't just familiar, it was personal. Her father had mentioned it once when she was a kid, talking about an experimental aircraft that could fly where radars can't. He'd said it with a strange pride, then never brought it up again. After his disappearance, her mother had burned most of his papers. But Marley remembered the insignia, a silver circle with 3 intersecting lines stitched onto his old flight jacket. She parked the truck and walked back inside. The air had grown colder, the silence thicker. In the center of the hangar, she crouched again, tracing that faint seam in the floor with a wrench handle. When she knocked, the echo came back clearer, this time deep, metallic, hollow. Her breath caught. She rapped again. The sound rolled like thunder beneath her boots. Marley sat back on her heels, staring at the concrete under her flashlight. "You're not just hollow," she whispered. "You're hiding something." And as the light flickered across the vast, empty hangar, she knew she was no longer standing on forgotten ground. She was standing on top of a secret someone had worked very hard to bury. By the 3rd morning, the hangar had started to feel less like a ruin and more like a riddle. Marley sat on the tailgate of her truck with a thermos of coffee, staring at the yawning structure and the faint line running through its floor. She'd spent half the night online, chasing every record she could find about Meridian Aerospace. Most of the links led nowhere: dead pages, redacted archives, and grainy photos of test pilots with their faces blurred. But buried deep in a county ledger, she found one name that hadn't been erased: Lyle Hollander, the last recorded deed holder before the government repossessed the property in 1972. She found him 2 towns over, living in a trailer surrounded by stacks of rusting equipment and the scent of old motor oil. He was in his 70s now, half blind and half suspicious. When Marley mentioned the hangar, he froze mid-step. "Why are you digging up ghosts, girl?" he asked, his voice graveled by cigarettes and regret. "Because I own the place now," Marley replied. "And it's not just a building. There's something underneath it. You used to manage the property, didn't you?" He stared at her for a long moment, then motioned her inside. The trailer's walls were lined with old flight photos, blueprints, and newspaper clippings that had yellowed into sepia. On one shelf sat a rusted metal placard, "Meridian Aerospace Advanced Propulsion Division." Lyle poured 2 cups of coffee, his hands trembling slightly. "I signed that deed over after they shut it all down. Wasn't supposed to talk about it. Still ain't, technically." What was it? Marley pressed gently. He hesitated. Not planes. Not the kind you're thinking of. They were testing launch systems. Vertical ascension. Said they wanted to eliminate runways altogether. But that wasn't the part that scared me. What was? The nights. His gaze drifted to the window as if replaying something he wished he could forget. They'd run tests after dark. Whole hangar would hum low, steady, like the earth was breathing. Then one night, it stopped. Next morning, every engineer was gone. No trucks, no records, nothing. Just guards welding the floor shut. Marley felt her throat tighten. You saw them seal it? Watched it with my own eyes. They brought in concrete mixers at dawn, poured a new floor over the hatch. Said it was a safety precaution. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. But I heard them, before they left, talking about Project Meridian. Said something down there still worked. She showed him a photo on her phone, the faint seam she'd uncovered. His expression went pale. You shouldn't have opened it, he said. I haven't. Not yet. Then don't. He leaned back, sighing. You think you found a treasure, miss, but all you'll dig up down there is trouble. Marley left the trailer with the old man's warning echoing in her ears, but his words only fueled her determination. If they had gone through that much effort to bury it, it had to be worth finding. The drive back to the hangar felt longer than usual, her mind replaying every sentence he'd said. When she parked, the sun was setting, throwing amber light across the hangar doors. The place looked almost peaceful again, like it was pretending to be ordinary. Marley stood in the doorway, gloved hands resting on her hips, staring at that single crack in the floor. You were welded shut for a reason, she whispered. Guess we're about to find out what it was. The night she decided to scan the hangar floor, the air felt heavier than usual, a stillness that pressed against the walls, like held breath. Marley and Jonah worked under the glare of halogen lamps, their tools spread out across a folding table. Jonah Morales had been her friend since high school, a structural engineer with a habit of questioning everything she did. He'd laughed when she bought the hangar too, but now curiosity had dragged him out to see it himself. You're telling me you think there's a room under here, Jonah said, rolling the portable ground-penetrating radar into place. You realize that sounds like a conspiracy theory, right? Marley smirked. Then, prove me wrong. The machine's hum filled the silence as the scanner crawled across the cracked concrete, sending pulses of radar through the ground. Marley watched the monitor anxiously as thin lines rippled across its surface, shallow at first, then suddenly breaking into jagged gaps and dark voids that formed a pattern too precise to be natural. Jonah leaned closer, frowning. That can't be right. What? He tapped the screen. There's an entire cavity down there big enough to fit an aircraft hangar under an aircraft hangar. Look at the symmetry, the depth markers. Marley, this is man-made. Her pulse quickened. How deep? About 30 feet. Whatever it is, it runs the full length of the building. Marley exhaled slowly, her excitement edging into awe. I knew it. Jonah looked up from the scanner, uneasy. You realize this could be dangerous. The floor could collapse. She shook her head. No. They built it to last. Someone wanted it sealed, not destroyed. She dragged a ladder toward one of the support beams and climbed up to the old control catwalk. The air smelled of oil and rust. From up high, she could see the hangar's layout, the way the cracks in the floor lined up perfectly with the center of the space, forming a faint rectangle. She switched off her headlamp for a moment, letting her eyes adjust. The moonlight slipping through the broken skylights landed directly over the seam. A perfect spotlight. Jonah, she called down. Get the boroscope. He rummaged through his toolbox and handed her a narrow inspection camera with a cable attached. Marley drilled a small pilot hole into the concrete at the seam's edge, dust billowing around her boots. She fed the camera into the hole, squinting at the tiny screen in her hand. At first, it was darkness. Then light. A narrow beam reflecting off something metallic. The camera turned slightly, revealing what looked like a tunnel wall made of polished steel. It stretched on, smooth and unbroken, the lens catching a flicker of color that looked eerily like a warning stripe. Marley froze. Jonah climbed the ladder beside her. "What are you seeing?" She angled the screen toward him. "An entire tunnel, perfectly intact." He stared, mouth tightening. "That's impossible." "No," Marley said quietly. "That's Meridian." The signal from the camera began to glitch. Static. Flickers. Then a brief flash of white light before the feed cut out completely. Jonah muttered a curse, pulling the cable back up. "The signal's dead," but Marley barely heard him. Her mind was already racing, connecting pieces that had lived separately in her head for years. Her father's cryptic stories, the missing engineers, the strange hum in the night. Whatever had been buried beneath this hangar wasn't abandoned. It was waiting. She looked down through the dust and darkness toward the concrete floor. "Tomorrow," she said quietly, "we dig." By sunrise, the hangar had transformed from a tomb of silence into a battlefield of noise. The growl of Marley's rented excavator echoed off the steel walls, rattling the windows and shaking rust from the rafters. She'd spent the night pacing, replaying that flicker of metallic tunnel again and again in her head. Now, with Jonah reluctantly at her side, there was no turning back. The floor's concrete had been marked with chalk lines, the scanner's readings plotted like treasure maps across the surface. Beneath those lines, history waited buried, sealed, and forgotten by design. Jonah adjusted his hard hat and glanced over the rumbling machine. "If this floor caves in, it's on you," he muttered. "Noted," Marley said, tightening her gloves. "Just keep the generator running." The first hit came heavy. The excavator's claw tore into the cracked concrete with a shriek, chunks flying like shrapnel. Dust clouded the air, filling the hangar with the smell of pulverized stone and old oil. The ground trembled slightly with each strike, like something beneath them was stirring. After the third pass, the claw struck metal. A sharp, resonant clang rang through the air. Marley cut the engine, her heart jumping. "Did you hear that?" she called out. Jonah frowned, stepping forward with his flashlight. The beam swept over the crater where the concrete had split away, revealing a smooth steel surface below. It wasn't rebar, it was plating. Welded seams crisscrossed the metal in perfect geometric lines. "This isn't just a floor," Jonah said softly. "It's a lid." They cleared debris by hand, shoveling away rubble until the outline became visible, a massive rectangular hatch, maybe 12 feet across, bordered by thick, riveted joints. Marley knelt beside it, running her fingers along the cold steel. The welds were old but still solid, scarred by torch marks that told a clear story. Someone hadn't sealed it for safety. They'd locked it away. She picked up a pry bar and wedged it beneath one corner, testing the resistance. Nothing. She tried again, harder, until the metal groaned but held fast. Jonah knelt beside her, sweating under the glare of the halogens. "This is crazy," he said. "We don't even know what's under there." Marley met his eyes, her voice steady. "We're about to." They worked for hours, alternating between cutting and prying. The old welds fought them every inch, spitting sparks that filled the air with the sharp scent of burning metal. Finally, with a thunderous crack, the last seam gave way. Marley dropped her tools and stepped back as the hatch shifted slightly under its own weight. A thin line of air hissed through the gap, cold, sterile, and wrong. Jonah coughed, waving his hand. "Smells like jet fuel?" Marley crouched low, shining her light into the darkness below. A metal ladder descended into the void, vanishing after 20 feet. The walls glimmered faintly, smooth and silver. Every instinct told her to stop, to call someone, to step away. But instincts had never built anything worth remembering. She looked up at Jonah. "You don't have to come," he sighed. "Yeah, I know. Which means I'm coming." Marley pulled a respirator over her mouth and gripped the ladder. The metal was freezing against her gloves, the air colder still. As she descended, The light from above faded into a single beam that cut through the dust like fog. The deeper she went, the quieter everything became. No wind, no hum, not even the sound of their own breathing beyond the filters. When her boots hit solid ground, she looked up and froze. They weren't in a tunnel. They were standing inside a massive underground chamber. The ceiling arched high above them, lined with silent lights that had once burned bright. Across the far wall, barely visible in the glow of their flashlights, stretched a massive black runway, flanked by dormant engines and aircraft scaffolds frozen mid-construction. Jonah's whisper broke the silence. "Marley, what the hell is this place?" She stepped forward slowly, her voice trembling with awe. "It's the runway, the one they buried, and somewhere deep in that cold metal labyrinth, beneath layers of dust and secrecy, something mechanical gave a faint, distant click, like a machine waking from a 50-year sleep. The chamber swallowed sound. Every step Marley took down the dim corridor felt like walking into a memory that didn't belong to her. The air was chilled and dense, and the silence wasn't empty, it was expectant. Lights embedded in the walls flickered, as if aware of her presence, some buzzing faintly, others cold and dead. Jonah moved beside her, his boots echoing against the polished floor, his breath visible in the cold. They passed support columns marked in faded stencils, Meridian Aerospace, and a series of numbers that meant nothing to Jonah, but everything to Marley. She recognized them, not from schematics or blueprints from home. Her father's notebooks, years ago, filled with sketches and equations she hadn't understood at the time. He used to mutter the numbers like a mantra, always stopping when he caught her listening. At the end of the corridor, the space opened up. Marley and Jonah stepped out onto a catwalk that overlooked the impossible. A vast underground runway stretching the length of a football field, lit in flickering intervals by old emergency lights. On the far end, something loomed in the dark, the outline of a craft, unfinished, its silver hull half-shrouded by tarp and time. "Jesus," Jonah whispered. "This shouldn't exist." Marley didn't answer. She gripped the railing, her eyes locked on the insignia painted on the wall above the runway. A circle with 3 intersecting lines, the symbol from her father's flight jacket. Her chest tightened. This wasn't just Meridian's facility. This was his. They descended the catwalk stairs slowly, boots echoing across the chamber. Marley reached the edge of the runway, crouching to touch the surface. The paint was still intact beneath the dust. "This place was operational," she said. "Maybe not finished, but close." Jonah walked toward the tarp-covered craft. "This doesn't look like a normal jet. The shape's off too compact. No vertical stabilizers, no exhaust nozzles." He lifted the tarp, revealing smooth alloy, curved and seamless. This thing wasn't designed for airfields. It was built for something else. Marley knelt near the nose of the craft, wiping grime from a small access panel. The label beneath read, "VTOL, Series 1 Prototype. Engineered for subsurface launch deployment." Jonah stepped back. "That's military grade, vertical takeoff from underground. But why? Why bury it?" She looked up at him. "To hide it. Maybe even to protect it." Behind the runway, a control station sat dormant, its glass panels coated in grime. Marley powered up the nearest terminal using Jonah's portable generator. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, one of the old monitors flickered to life. A blinking prompt appeared in the top left corner. "Login required. Project Meridian." She stared at it, then typed the only word she could think of. Her father's name, Reyes. Access denied. She tried again. Davidreyes. The screen blinked. Clearance accepted. Engineer Level 3. The screen shifted to reveal an archived log, dated the 3rd of April 1972. A recording began to play, audio only. A man's voice filled the chamber, calm, familiar, and heartbreakingly clear. "This is David Reyes. Final test pending on VTOL Series 1. We've sealed the hangar after orders from upstairs. No press, no trace. If you're hearing this, then someone found what we couldn't finish. Marley's throat closed. She stepped away from the monitor, heart pounding. The voice continued. They wanted to bury it. Said the project was too risky, too advanced. But I couldn't let it die. I left something for you, for whoever finds this. Keep it alive. The message ended. Silence fell again. Jonah slowly turned toward her. That was my dad, she said, voice barely a whisper. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, in the far corner of the chamber, a light flickered on above a vault door sealed with a mechanical keypad. Marley stared at it, breath caught in her chest. Her father hadn't just worked here. He'd lived here, built something here, hidden something, and whatever it was still waiting. The keypad beneath the blinking red light was old, industrial, the kind built to resist time, weather, and war. Marley ran her fingers over it, then stepped back. It's sealed tight, she muttered. And if the rest of this place is any clue, that door hasn't opened in decades. It is intricate. Jonah was already scanning the walls around them, tracing the outline of the vault. Reinforced steel. We'd need explosives to crack it open or the right code. Marley's mind was spinning. Her father's voice still echoed in her head. I left something for you. He knew someone might come, maybe even hoped for it. That vault was no accident. It was a message, a challenge. And he'd hidden the answer somewhere. She turned back toward the catwalk and sprinted up the steps, retracing their path. Jonah followed, breathless. Where are you going? He left something, she said over her shoulder. We just didn't know how to read it yet. At the terminal where her father's voice had played, Marley began digging through old directories. Most were corrupt or empty. Then she found a file marked simply DR, Meridian, divided by private. She opened it. A series of handwritten notes appeared on screen, scanned from an old journal. Most were schematics drawings of the VTOL Series 1 craft, but in the margin of one page was a string of numbers and letters. For MR 0414, DR17, V3. Jonah leaned in. You think that's the code? I think it's a clue. She memorized the string, then hurried back to the vault. The keypad accepted 8 digits. Marley typed in 04141717. Her birth date, twice? Maybe? Error. She tried. 0414, DR17. Error again. Finally, she typed just 041417, her birthday and her father's initials. Click. The vault hissed. Metal bolts groaned as ancient hydraulics pushed the door open. Cold air rushed out colder than the chamber, untouched by time. Marley stepped inside slowly, flashlight trembling in her hand. The room wasn't large, but every inch of it was sacred. Against the back wall stood 3 sealed crates, a rolling work table, and a set of dusty shelves lined with engineering binders. A single lamp above the workbench flickered to life as she crossed the threshold, like the place had been holding its breath for her. She opened the first crate. Inside, stacks of blueprints, carefully preserved. The label on the top sheet read, Project Meridian, Vertical Tunnel Launch Platform, divided by classified. The next crate held prototype parts, control modules, flight components, hand-etched circuit boards. They were labeled in her father's handwriting. Some had initials, others had dates, the last one listed as March 1972, just weeks before the program was shut down. Jonah opened the final crate and went still. Marley, he said quietly. She looked. Inside was a leather-bound notebook, worn with age, its cover stamped with 3 letters, D-R-R. David Raphael Reyes. She opened it. Inside were notes, diagrams, journal entries, and then, tucked between the pages, a photograph. Her father, younger, smiling beside the same prototype jet they'd found covered in tarp. Standing next to him was a second figure, a man in a military uniform, face blurred out, hand resting on the plane's nose. On the back of the photo, a message was scrawled in faded ink. "If the world isn't ready, bury the future. If someone finds it, make sure they can fly." Marley pressed the photo to her chest, suddenly unsteady. All this time, her father hadn't vanished. He'd disappeared himself, buried his work, his life, his legacy, so that someday, someone might bring it back, and he'd made sure that someone would be her. She looked up at Jonah. This wasn't just an experiment. It was a launch system, a way to escape detection, to fly without a runway. That's what the underground tunnel was for. Jonah nodded, still in awe. And he was building it in secret, from the inside. Marley walked back toward the vault door, the notebook clutched in her hand, heart pounding with 100 emotions. Grief, wonder, pride. Her father hadn't vanished into the past. He had built the future and left it for her to finish. The next few days blurred into long hours of excavation, decoding, and quiet awe. Marley and Jonah made the underground hangar their second home, cleaning systems, organizing documents, and studying the blueprints with a reverence usually reserved for scripture. The VTOL Series 1 wasn't just ahead of its time. It was impossible by 1,970 seconds standards. Vertical launch from an underground tube, stealth geometry, adaptive avionics features that still stretched the limits of modern aerospace. Her father hadn't been working on a prototype. He'd been building a revolution. But it wasn't just them anymore. It started small footprints near the fence line, tire tracks in the gravel that hadn't been there the night before. Jonah shrugged it off at first. Kids, maybe. Hunters. Marley wasn't convinced. Then the power went out. Not just the generator, the entire grid feeding the surrounding block. When they returned the next morning, the bolt cutters she'd left by the gate were missing. And then, the camera caught them. Marley had installed a single trail cam, mounted high on the hangar's north side, just as a precaution. At 3:12 a.m., it captured two dark figures near the entrance. Both wore tactical gear, black boots, and visored helmets. One appeared to be scanning the hangar with a handheld device. The other knelt beside the sealed tunnel hatch, inspecting the welds Marley had painstakingly cut through days earlier. "They know," Jonah said quietly, standing beside her in the darkened office. The footage played on a loop. Marley's voice was low and certain. "They always knew. We just woke them up." That afternoon, Marley returned to her truck to find a plain envelope under the wiper blade. Inside was a typed message, unsigned, untraceable. "Cease all activity at the Meridian site. Do not attempt to open or restore any assets. You are being observed." She showed it to Jonah, who went pale. "This isn't just old tech. It's owned tech. The kind that never really stops being classified." Marley's response was immediate. "Then let them come." They doubled security, reinforced the tunnel door, backed up every digital file onto multiple encrypted drives, and sealed off the vault again. But even so, unease settled over the hangar like dust. Marley slept less, ate less. Every creak of the metal roof, every shifting shadow outside the hangar lights, became a question she couldn't answer. Then, one morning, they arrived to find the tunnel hatch resealed, welded, cleanly, perfectly. Marley dropped to her knees beside it, heart hammering in her chest. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." Jonah stood over her, stunned. "That wasn't us. That was last night." They stared at the floor in silence. Someone had come, slipped in, covered their tracks, and if that wasn't enough, a second envelope had been left behind, this time inside the hangar, on the workbench next to the prototype's stripped-down engine. The note was handwritten in ink that bled slightly at the edges. "You've gone far enough. Walk away. You're not the first to try." Marley stared at the words, fingers trembling. Then she looked at the photo of her father tacked above the table. she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Maybe not the first, but I'll be the one who finishes it. The warning note didn't stop her. It did the opposite. Marley worked through the night, hands trembling not from fear, but from a new kind of clarity. Whoever was watching didn't want the truth uncovered, which meant the truth mattered more than she realized. The seals could be cut again. The systems could be brought back online. And if she could find proof undeniable, recorded proof of what her father had built and why it was buried, maybe she could keep the shadows from burying it again. She went back to the vault and opened her father's notebook, this time with different eyes. In the back, pressed flat between 2 pages, was a thin, magnetic strip, nearly invisible. She peeled it away and realized it was a data tape, wrapped in insulation, labeled in tiny, precise handwriting. Meridian test. Final flight log. Jonah helped her digitize it, rigging a cobbled-together playback using an old VHS converter and a laptop with a burner OS. The footage was grainy. The frame shook. But the timestamp was there, the 26th of March 1972, 3 days before the program was shut down. The video opened with static, then cleared just enough to show the launch chamber, the one beneath their feet. The runway was active, humming, lights flickering like they hadn't in decades. And then the camera panned to the VTOL prototype. Not the one under the tarp. A finished one, fully assembled, sleek, gleaming. Inside the cockpit was a man, helmeted, gloved. His flight suit bore the same insignia Marley had seen stitched onto her father's jacket. As the engines roared to life, the video's audio crackled with voices, some clipped and military, others calm and technical. Then, one voice rose above the others. Test pilot, David Rafael Reyes. Vertical launch sequence commencing. Marley froze. Her father hadn't just built the VTOL. He'd flown it. The next few moments were chaos, the craft lifting from the tunnel, wind and light thrashing against the camera lens. Then, a sharp alarm. The footage skipped, distorted, then steadied. The prototype was in mid-air, visibly struggling. Control issues. Vibration. Something went wrong. A voice yelled to abort, and then the screen went dark. For a long moment, Marley thought it was the end of the recording. But just before the tape cut out, one final frame appeared. Blurry. Crooked. A man, her father, climbing from the wreckage. Limping. Alive. She paused the video, heart pounding. "He made it out," she whispered. "He didn't die in a test crash. He walked away." Jonah stared at the screen. Then why vanish? Why disappear completely? Marley turned to the workbench, pulled open a drawer where she'd stashed an old toolbox from her dad's belongings, the one her mom had almost thrown out. She remembered it from childhood, greasy, dented, always locked. She took a screwdriver, popped the false bottom. Inside was a flash drive wrapped in cloth and a folded letter addressed to her by name. She sat down, hands shaking, and opened it. "Marley, if you're reading this, then you found what they tried to bury. I couldn't tell you, not without putting you in danger. The VTOL was more than a machine. It was a threat to those who made billions, keeping flight slow and visible. They came for us. They buried the project, but I couldn't destroy it. I left it for someone with fire in their blood and steel in their hands. I left it for you. There's enough on the drive to finish the build. Not the government version. Ours. I built the frame. You build the wings." Tears blurred her vision. The flash drive was warm in her palm, like it had waited for her all these years. Jonah sat beside her, quiet. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Then she stood, wiping her face, her voice steady now. "He didn't run. He protected it. Protected me." Jonah nodded slowly. "So what now?" She looked back at the tarp-covered prototype. "Now we finish the flight." The storm came the night Marley brought the engines online. Not a storm of rain or thunder, but one of consequence, of choice. of history finally demanding a verdict. Outside, the skies were clear, but inside the hangar, everything hummed with electricity, literal and otherwise. Jonah calibrated the stabilization system, while Marley ran diagnostics on the control module her father had left behind. The flash drive's contents were more than technical specs. They were instructions, emotionally laced with handwritten notes, safety overrides, even personalized edits for Version M, her version. The VTOL Series 1 prototype stood naked beneath the floodlights. The tarp was gone. The hull had been patched, sanded, repainted in matte graphite. Sleek, silent, reborn. Marley had named it Echo 1, not for the sound it made, but for what it carried. An echo of her father's voice, of an idea once silenced, now amplified. Jonah adjusted his headset. "We've got one shot at this," he said. "Engines are ready. Launch tunnel is clear. Door retraction system is holding. You sure you want to fly it yourself?" She glanced at the flight suit, hanging from the hook her father's. "I was born for this." Marley suited up in silence. Every strap she buckled felt like fastening herself to something deeper, to grief, to legacy, to the fire that had refused to die. As she climbed into the cockpit, her fingers hovered over the controls like she'd been here before in another life. The seat molded to her. The dashboard lit up as soon as her palm hit the console. Pilot recognized DRR-DNA match access, granted. Jonah's voice crackled in her earpiece. "You're cleared for ignition," she smiled. "Copy that. Let's wake her up." The engines began to purr, low and rhythmic, like a heartbeat beneath metal skin. Lights flared along the runway. The hidden roof panels groaned open, revealing the night sky above a slice of stars peeking through the bones of a forgotten world. Outside, headlights appeared along the ridge. SUVs. Black. Silent. She saw the glint of lenses, the outlines of men in body armor. Jonah's voice came through again, urgent. "We've got company." "Government? Maybe private? Doesn't matter, they're armed." Marley flipped the final switch. The chamber vibrated, the tunnel walls lit with motion sensor strobes. "They're not stopping this," she said. "Not this time." With a deep, mechanical howl, Echo 1 lifted. Dust and debris spiraled beneath the craft as it rose from the tunnel like a ghost reclaimed from the grave. Outside, the men scrambled, barking into radios, but they were too late. The prototype cleared the launch doors, hovering silently before accelerating forward with shocking grace. No roar, no smoke. Just motion. Controlled, defiant. From the sky, Marley saw the entire town stretched below quiet streets. Blinking traffic lights. The hangar a speck of rusted history reborn in flame and flight. She whispered into the headset. "Dad, we did it." When she touched down an hour later, the SUVs were gone. No sign of intrusion, only Jonah waiting at the runway's edge, eyes wide, arms crossed. "You were beautiful," he said. "You are," she laughed, breathless. "You didn't think I'd let them bury him twice, did you?" In the weeks that followed, word spread. Not officially, never officially, but stories whispered across airstrips, restoration shops, and veterans' halls. A girl rebuilt something impossible. A daughter honored a dream the world tried to forget. Marley never sold the VTOL, never licensed the plans. Instead, she transformed the hangar into something her father never had the chance to build, a sanctuary for forgotten machines and the people brave enough to restore them. She hung his photo on the wall, framed his flight notes, and above the prototype, painted in clean, bold letters, "If you find it, fly it." The underground runway was no longer a secret. It was a beginning. And Marley Reyes, once mocked for buying a broken hangar, had become the pilot of a legacy, not just engineered in steel, but written in faith, fire, and flight.